Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Ashley and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approvals in Central America. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we'll be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunications approvals in Central America. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in Central America. If you have any questions on the topics presented today, or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. These are the 6 countries that comprise Central America and their associated type approval authorities. Today we will be going over the type approval process and some of the requirements for type approval in these countries. Most of the countries do have very similar requirements such as acceptance of FCC or CE reports or recognition of the FCC or CE label, but there are some minor differences in terms of exemptions. Today we'll be going over some of these details and hopefully get started on type approval for these countries for your products. So let's first begin with Belize and the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission, PUC, of Belize is the regulatory body in the telecommunications industry. The telecom sector of the PUC ensures compatibility of all telecommunication, broadcasting, and radio communication equipment with the public switch telecommunications network through their type approval procedures. This includes regulatory compliance requirements related to the frequency spectrum and telecommunications infrastructure for most consumer electronics. The Public Utilities Commission grants and regulates telecom and wireless approvals, and in most cases they will accept regulatory test reports from other countries to be submitted as proof of compliance, such as FCC or CE RED compliance reports. No person or entity is permitted to import, install, make, for sale, or use, operate any equipment in Belize per the regulations of the PUC unless granted a permit for the equipment. All products that utilize radio frequency and cellular technologies require PUC type approval and certification before import and commercialization, such as phones and tablets, personal trackers, wireless microphones, mobile phones, RFID equipment, radio alarms. There are 2 types of approvals for wireless equipment in Belize: PUC permit and PUC license. All telecommunication and radio frequency equipment must be granted a permit by the Public Utilities Commission prior to import, installation, sale, or use operation. Users of certain telecommunications equipment must also obtain a license from the PUC as required by law for the operation of such equipment. For products that do not require approval, the agency will provide an exemption letter signifying that no TA is required to have for your records so as to avoid any issues with customs upon importation of your equipment to Belize. Taking a look at some of the type approval required under the PUC permit, such as receivers, transceivers, walkie-talkies, drones, etc. So these are some of the radio, receivers, transmitters that are regulated under the PUC permit. Moving on, still under the PUC permit, satellite communication equipments, low noise amplifiers, receivers, modulators, very small aperture terminals, receiving transmitting antenna, encoders, decoders, feed horns, RF-IF amplifiers, and telecommunication equipment customer premises equipment excluding regular telephone, decimal machine, cordless telephones, limited range types only, cellular telephones, all other telecommunications and CPE connecting to any licensed telecom provider's network. And last on the regulated type approval list PUC permit is electromagnetic radiating devices, industrial and laboratory electric equipment, induction and dielectric heating equipment, remote radio control equipment, radar equipment, electromechanical apparatus. Users of certain telecommunications equipment must also obtain a license from the PUC as required by law. So the type approval list of telecom and radio equipment for PUC license, this is non-exhaustive. Land mobile radio transceivers, marine radio transceivers, satellite TV systems, internet satellite systems, amateur radio operators, citizen band radio operators, aircraft radios, aeronautical band radios, point-to-point links, paging systems. And just to recap, users of certain telecommunications equipment must also obtain a license from the PUC as required by law for operation of such equipment, and all telecom and radio frequency equipment must be granted a permit by the Public Utilities Commission prior to import, installation, sale, or use operation, and PUC issued permit is mandatory requirement. There are no requirements in Belize for local testing, marking, labeling, or local and country representative, and the certificate remains valid as long as the product remains unchanged. Approval times can range from 4 to 12 weeks, but typically are completed in less than 6 weeks. Documentation: manufacturer dealer application for approval, technical files, product specifications, operational description, user manual, FCC and/or CE test reports, type approval certificate, letter from country of origin, other forms of type approval by other country authorities or certification schemes may be accepted at the discretion of the PUC, approval agreement and authorization. Testing: in-country testing is not required. Samples may be requested for verifications. Local rep is not required. Lead time: 3 to 6 weeks for CPE, up to 12 weeks for switches and other high-capacity equipment. Validity has no expiration. Renewals are not required unless product has been modified. In general, the PUC needs to advise on these changes to determine if a new TA is required. Family model grouping: yes, you can, if using the same radio modules and are identical in terms of RF characteristics. And module approval is good in Belize. You can do it there. Product marking: no unique marker labeling requirement. FCC and CE labels and markings are acceptable. Maintenance of equipment, systems in place for efficient repairs, reasonable measures to ensure equipment and services are maintained, provided, or replaced within a reasonable time. Non-compliance: equipment will be seized by customs prior to entering country. Equipment re-exported if not certified for Belize. Fines up to 10,000 BZD for unlicensed. So, just to come back to the brief overview, we just went over Belize and we have 5 more countries to go. Next up is Costa Rica, and the regulatory body is SUTEL. SUTEL is a Superintendencia de Telecomunicaciones, is a telecommunications regulating agency in Costa Rica. Products that use radio frequency and cellular technologies will require approval and certification to import and commercialization in Costa Rica. They're in charge of managing the radio frequency spectrum, and they issue approvals for telecom equipment. They also accept some reports and grants as proof of compliance for non-cellular devices but for cellular devices in-country testing is required. Some of what SUTEL regulates would be cellular devices, RFID, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth radio products. So there are two main methods for type approval in Costa Rica under SUTEL. Approval of mobile terminals, regulation number RCS 358-2018, which supersedes regulation number RCS 332-2013 and came into effect on December 10, 2018. This is a new standard added to the field of testing for cellular products and provides additional guidelines for RF and battery performance tests. This applies to cellular equipment. Free band approval regulation RCS 154-2018, which supersedes regulation number RCS 431-2010 and came into effect on May 3rd of 2018. The update here includes updates to account for module and family certification. This now includes modular certification, and there will be a possibility of certifying different devices that share the same module as long as differences between the devices are mainly aesthetic, and also if the module is only part of the equipment that makes use of the radio spectrum. In addition, family certification will be possible if the manufacturer declares by a letter that all familiar devices have the same characteristics as the device for which documentation was provided, in terms of brand, hardware, and software version, frequencies of operation, output power, electric field strength, and antenna's power gain. Also, previously only WLAN was listed so far, but now many applications like RFID, SRD, and radars have been added. Any changes to existing or development of additional hardware versions of an already approved cellular device will require an update to the current certificate. It remains the case that any updates to the software version of an already approved cellular device requires an update effort. Labeling is only accepted in the form of a physical affixed label on the device, or an e-label which must be accessible through the menu of the device. For physical tape labels, the label must be made of a durable material and must be declared to SUTEL at the point of applying for type approval. Market surveillance will be enforced to ensure the compliance of the above labeling requirements. It is not known at this stage how this will be enforced between SUTEL and Costa Rican customs, and when this will be implemented. Okay, so now we will take a look at free band approval, which will not require any in-country testing. So one of the main updates for the regulated frequency approval is the additional regulated frequency bands. On the left is before the modification of Addendum 7. After the modification of Addendum 7 is on the right with more frequency bands available. Basically only WLAN was listed so previously, but now many applications like RFID, SRD, and radars have been added. Okay, so I hope that was helpful for determining which approval scheme will be good for your products and some of the updated standards. Now we will be moving on to the specific type approval requirements necessary to get the certificate and some of the responsibilities after for the suppliers. The technical documentation must have the hardware and software version of the product. SUTEL accepts and prefers FCC report, but may accept CE report in some cases. Label because if device uses cellular frequency, SUTEL requests label shows model, brand, IMEI, frequency. Renewal, any approvals issued under the older standards are still in compliance, but any updates, including software, hardware version updates, will require a certificate update. Family model, some characteristics as the device for which documentation was provided, brand, hardware and software version, frequencies of operation, output power, electric field strength, and antenna's power gain. Modular approval is allowed. Applications for modular certifications have to contain a datasheet of the end evidence in which the module will be integrated. The validity has no expiration. The lead time is 2 to 4 weeks for free brand approval, 4 to 8 weeks for mobile terminal approval. And testing, in-country testing is not required for free brand approval. In-country testing is required for mobile terminal approval. So moving on to supplier responsibilities in terms of product label, product marking, it must be affixed on the product. Permanent and legible, may be printed in black and white. E-labeling is allowed. No restriction on material used for the label. There are two options for the SUTEL label. You can have the colorful SUTEL logo with type approval and year label on the left, or the black and white label on the right with the type approval and year. For surveillance, the General Quality Director conducts inspections to verify compliance with the requirements. Penalties in the case of non-compliance. Okay, so Costa Rica did have some in-country testing required for cellular device. Moving on to the other countries, I believe they do not have any in-country testing device requirements. Next up, we will be talking about SIGET, the Type Approval Authority of El Salvador. Superintendencia General de Electricidad y Telecomunicaciones, SIGET, is the government-regulated body tasked with managing the electricity generation and telecommunications infrastructure and industries in El Salvador, including radio spectrum usage and assignments for specific frequencies from 3 kHz to 3000 GHz range. SIGET accepts CE Red reports as proof of compliance with telecom and wireless products, allowing for their legal importation into the country, as well as FCC reports. Products that utilize radio frequency, cellular, or satellite technology require approval and certification in order to commercialize in El Salvador. Some examples are Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFID, radar, satellite telecommunications. Okay, so quickly going over some approval requirements pertaining to SIGET in El Salvador. Again, FCC CE, product specifications, operational description, user manual, label example, internal, external photos. In-country testing is not required. Samples may be requested for verification, but it's not common. Local representative not required. Lead time 48 weeks. Validity, no expiration on the certificate, does not expire. Renewals, new type approval, not required unless product has been modified. Family model grouping, normally not allowed, but can be based on FCC CE approval. Modular approval, yes, based on FCC CE. If it is modular approval for FCC, then it is allowed to the same for SIGET. Labeling, FCC and CE label is accepted by SIGET in El Salvador. Okay, so that about sums up for some of the basic requirements for El Salvador. Most of these countries do not have special label requirements, and most of them will accept FCC and CE labels, though it's always advised to have those labels on your product. Moving on to Guatemala and SIT. The Superintendencia de Telecomunicaciones, SIT, of Guatemala is the technical body of the Ministry of Communications, Infrastructure, and Housing, whose main functions are manage and supervise the operation of the radio spectrum, manage the telecommunications registry, apply where appropriate the sanctions contemplated in the General Telecommunications Law, liaise with the international telecommunications organizations. No specific requirement that prior approval is necessary before the importation of the equipment. General Telecommunications Law of Guatemala does not specifically require prior approval of electric equipment that is imported into the country. The SIT approval can be requested by sending a letter of inquiry to the agency along with the technical specifications for the product. There are numerous exemptions for most wireless telecom products. For example, SRD such as Wi-Fi products used indoors with transmitted power output less than 500 megawatts can be imported without notifying SIT However, for transmitting outdoors, especially in regulated bands such as 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz, an inquiry should be made to SIT to obtain their ruling on the specific product. In most cases, SIT will accept proof of compliance from other countries, such as CE, and TTE compliance reports. They still need to apply for an exemption letter or notice to signify no type approval is necessary for a specific device prior to import or sale, but they still accept FCC and CE test reports. SIT type approval requirements for Guatemala, looking at the documentation, product specifications, schematics, user manual, FCC or CE test reports, label example, internal-external photos. You can still apply for exemption. Testing in country is not required. Local representative not required. Lead time 3 to 6 weeks. Renewals not required unless product has been modified. Labeling, FCC and CE label is accepted. Okay, now next we'll be moving on to CONATEL in Honduras. The Comisión Nacional de Telecomunicaciones, CONATEL, is the state agency that executes the regulation and coordination the telecommunications policy in the Republic of Honduras. Issues the regulations and technical standards required for the provision of telecommunications services, grants authorizations, permits, registrations, and licenses for the provision of telecommunications service and, if applicable, renews, modifies, declares their expiration date, or revokes them in accordance with the corresponding regulations, accepts and recognizes certificates from FCC, CE, IFE, TEL, and TELEC. Requirements here are similar for the most part to the other countries. FCC, CE documents are accepted. In-country testing is not required. There's no local rep necessary or specific labels. Lead time is 6 to 12 weeks. And some documentation is product specifications, schematics, user manual, test reports, label example, internal, external photos. The labeling, FCC and CE are accepted. Exemptions apply for low power devices. The validity has no expiration. Now moving on to ASEP of Panama. ASEP, Autoridad Nacional de los Servicios Públicos, is the telecommunications regulating agency in Panama. They not only control telecommunications products, they also control the drinking water, sanitation, electricity, as well as telecom, radio, and television. Products that use radio frequency technology require ASEP type approval and certification to import and commercialize in Panama. Some of the devices that are regulated are transceivers, personal trackers, wireless microphones, mobile phones, RFID equipment, radio alarms. So Panama does have some exemptions for type approval. For terminal equipment and any other device used to access the networks of the dealers of communication services, broadcasting and television transmitting equipment, passive components of transmission systems such as antennas, filters, lines of transmission, any other equipment determined by this regulatory entity through a future resolution. So the approval requirements here, no in-country testing is required, and we may use existing international test reports for the homologation process to obtain the ASEP approval. ASEP will perform technical analysis and evaluate the specifications of the device and its compliance with established regulations on the use of radio spectrum, especially those contained in the National Plan of Frequency Allocation and/or sectoral resolutions. Local representation is not required in Panama, and there are no country-specific labeling requirements that apply. Validity has no expiration time, and lead time is 4 to 8 weeks. Okay, so that sums it up for all the countries in Central America and their type approval authorities. I hope we were able to cover important information, and I hope you were able to get an understanding of the different countries' requirements in Central America. This concludes our webinar of the Central America Market Access Certifications and Approvals for Electrical Equipment and Wireless Products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for approval and certifications, as well as what requirements are applicable to your products. Vista Compliance Labs specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types and countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.